Between man and all else lay a tenuous agreement to which he is the sole observer. Man's domain is that of his own making, but it is a minuscule and pitiful place against which all else presses relentlessly. Within this place, man feigns humility, yet asserts the authority to ruthlessly curate all within his purview, for man believes himself king, and all else instruments with which he may exercise his will. In the domain of man, all must conform to his interests or perish, for man is concerned only with how all things may befit his ends alone. But that which exists has reason for being, whether it lay within the domain of man or not, and though man seldom accepts that which displeases him, all else cares little for the predilections of the fearful and discontent man, for all else predates man, and all else will outlive man. Halloween was little more than a regular night in the land of snakes and spiders. There were no decorations lining the shops, nor passers-by draped in elaborate costumes. The tenor of the evening was utterly mundane, and Fringy and Felix had chosen to spend it partaking in an activity they were exceptionally skilled at, sitting down for several hours, doing absolutely nothing. However, though they had no meaningful plans, Halloween had much in store for the Green Plague Doctor and his plush teal koala friend. "You know, you still haven't told me what we're going to watch," Felix grumbled as he weaved between a pair of shoppers. "Oh, just like some non-specific spooky movie," Fringy replied, limply waving his hand in the air. "Something like Screech 7 or I Have Some Idea of What You Got Up To During the Spring of 2015. You're speaking as if I'm supposed to understand what you're saying." Felix squinted. It's a meta thing, alright? Fringy rubbed his eyes and let out a protracted sigh. "Don't give it too much thought." You would say that. "What does that mean?" Fringy leered after coming to a halt and planting his hands on his hips. "I'm implying you're stupid," Felix smirked as he strolled past Fringy and entered the cinema. "Yeah, well, you're a koala." "That's racist, Fringy," Felix said, pivoting to face the Plague Doctor. Fringy sucked in a breath and pointed at Felix, but no words escaped his mouth. His expression sunk, as though he were a candle melting beneath an intense flame. He awkwardly stood before the entrance as Felix spun back around, mounted the stairs, and examined the screen dangling above the front desk. Listed on the display were a set of films Felix had little interest in watching, along with food so unreasonably priced that their sale virtually amounted to a violation of human rights. "We've just arrived and I already want to go home," Felix muttered to Fringy, who had only just made his way up the stairs. "Feels like I'm standing in a restaurant called Beige, where the only thing on the menu is grey paste served with mineral water." Felix shuddered at the thought of being forced to ingest mineral water. "Okay, I'll admit, I probably should have checked what was playing before we came here," Fringy slurred. "But hey, this could be a great opportunity for you to meet new people." "Fringy, you are a cave-dwelling goblin," Felix stated flatly whilst glaring at his companion. "The day you've earned the right to lecture anybody on the merits of social interaction will be the day Earth gets consumed by the sun." "Look, I'm working on it, alright?" Fringy said in an overly defensive manner. "I'm outside, I'm here, and I'm gonna talk to people." "Right, and to that end, you've brought us to a cinema." "Look at all these people, Felix," Fringy said, sweeping his arm left and right. "Does it seem like I'm desperate to avoid conversation?" "Okay," Felix said, glancing past Fringy and towards a group of young women chatting with one another a few feet away. "Go talk to those girls over there." Fringy sheepishly looked over his shoulder at the group of young women. They were all beautiful outgoing, and evidently well-adjusted, unlike the plague doctor with astoundingly poor posture who had been looking at them for slightly too long.
Talk to him about what?
Fringy muttered in an unusually elevated pitch.
Why are you looking at me? I thought you were a lone wolf Sigma male who isn't afraid of what other people think of him.
Felix folded his arms and grinned at Fringy, who by that stage was literally trembling at the thought of talking to anybody whom he didn't know.
Yeah, exactly!
Fringy exclaimed.
I don't need their approval.
Well, I take it you'd be equally indifferent to their disapproval, right? Felix chuckled as he pushed Fringy aside and started towards the group of women.
How about I introduce you to them? You know what, Felix?
Fringy abruptly shrieked as he grabbed the plush koala by the arm and dragged him to the front desk.
I think I found a non-specific scary movie you're bound to like.
And so, Fringy and Felix entered the theatre in confused spirits. The plague doctor marinated in sweat and self-pity, and the furry marsupial dragged into a place he didn't want to be to watch a film he didn't want to see. Felix couldn't help but feel like he'd been shortchanged, but Felix was also a koala, so he didn't feel compelled to put in the requisite effort to break free of Fringy's grasp and run for the exit. Thus concluded the banal portion of the pair's night. They were not prepared for what was to come. The packed theatre reeked of oil, equal parts owing to the food and the moviegoers themselves. Damp air filled the space, along with the mildly muted discord which always preceded the regularly scheduled advertisements and trailers, which typically included locally produced commercials promoting above-ground swimming pools and oversized carpets. Nursed in Fringy's arms was an ungodly amount of food. The mass of popcorn and chocolate bars didn't quite constitute a literal pile of fat and sugar, but to Felix, it seemed like a distinction without a difference. He watched in muted bewilderment as Fringy struggled to balance all his food atop his lap.
Felix, can you hold my ice cream for me?
Fringy asked with a pleading gaze.
Why?
Felix leered.
I just need to get all this food optimally arranged before the movie starts.
Fringy, Felix said, with a blank expression as he brought his hands together before his face.
Do you think that's a sentence which has ever been uttered by a worthwhile human being? If you cared to do any research into the matter, Felix, you'd find that billionaires make it a habit to optimize their daily routines,
Fringy said, eyes closed and holding his beak up high.
Right.
Felix nodded while glaring at the plague doctor.
And how much money do you have in the bank?
$74, Fringy replied in a weak and crackly voice as he sunk into his seat. Within mere seconds, Fringy perked back up as though he'd just stuffed all his negative emotions into a burlap sack and tossed said sack into an active volcano.
Anyway, can you please hold my ice cream cone for me? I don't want sticky hands, Felix said as he tightly tucked them beneath his arms. Look, the ice cream is already melting. What, you scared of a little ice cream, Felix? I'm not afraid the ice cream cone is going to beat me up and steal my wallet, Fringy. I just don't want it on me. Ooh, look out, Felix!
Fringy exclaimed as he waved the ice cream cone in the air.
Count Gelato is coming to get you.
Fine, Felix snapped as he yanked the ice cream cone from Fringy's hands.
You know, you wouldn't have to micromanage your food if you didn't eat so much. My body, my choice,
Fringy declared, only to realize the error of his smug ways as his enormous cup of cola slipped from his grasp and fell onto the floor.
Oh, God damn it! I think gravity's trying to send you a message,
Felix snickered, a gesture which was met with a cold glare.
Felix, do you have any serviettes?
Fringy said before hastily lifting his feet away from the rapidly expanding pool of cola.
Where exactly do you think I'd be hiding them? Underneath my eyelids? I thought all koalas have pouches. Yeah, the real ones, Fringy. Hey, well, you're pretty absorbent, right?
What? Felix grumbled, edging himself away from Fringy.
And plus, you're probably machine washable,
Fringy said, almost as if he were talking to himself.
Well, here's a thought,
Felix snapped.
How about we don't entertain blatant breaches of the Geneva Convention and instead you simply stand up and go get some serviettes yourself? But I want to watch the trailers,
Fringy exclaimed, pointing to the screen.
Well, it would seem as though you're at an impasse,
Felix said, his voice tinging with gruffness.
A very stupid impasse for which there is an obviously correct choice, but
a screech echoed through the cinema, immediately drawing Felix's gaze. One of the girls belonging to the group Fringy had cowered from was clasping at her chest while taking in several hurried breaths. Murmuring soon filled the theater, steadily overpowering the commercials. Some of the patrons sitting behind Fringy and Felix then pointed to the screen.
"Well, that's terrifying,"
Fringy declared, prompting Felix to turn around. An 8-legged silhouette was splayed against the corner of the projection. It was a large shadow, so much so that one could easily gleam the fine hairs peppering the creature's gangly legs.
"You'd think that would happen more often in this country, huh?"
Felix said as he stood up in his chair and peered at the projector. An unexpected set of gasps met Felix's ears as the spider standing on the projector moved, casting an even larger shadow across the screen. Suddenly, the shadow disappeared, but so swiftly that it was unclear if the spider had moved or evaporated. Fringy clutched his armrests and pressed himself further into the seat back as Felix scanned the far side of the theater. Felix's eyes widened as a black mass highlighted only by the faint ambient light of the projector hurtled towards him. Only narrowly dodging the apparition, Felix watched as what appeared to be a man draped in an enormous cape glided over the theater. The discord intensified as the man brought himself to a halt just shy of the screen and hovered in the air for a few seconds before slowly descending to the ground.
"Greetings, humans,"
the strange man chuckled, his back still turned to the now utterly silent moviegoers.
"Felix?"
Fringy quivered as he repeatedly tapped the teal koala on the shoulder. Felix batted Fringy's hand away from his shoulder before squinting at the strange man standing before the screen. He shuddered as the figure twirled in place, sweeping aside his cape to reveal his skinny form, pale skin, slick black hair, and piercing red eyes. Most disconcerting of all was the man's forearms, 2 of which he pressed to his chest before bowing.
"My name is Count Arachnia,"
the man declared in a strange accent.
"And regrettably for you, this screening will not be going ahead as planned."
"What the fuck is that thing?"
a young man shouted from 2 rows behind Fringy and Felix.
"Good sir, I am your reckoning,"
Arachnia said with a heavy nod.
"I am humility incarnate, fed stunningly handsome and intelligent servant, here to bestow upon you a lesson which you will not forget until your dying day, which just so happens to be today. What a crazy coincidence."
Count Arachnia shot into the air and levitated in front of the screen. A cacophony of screams filled the theater as Felix clenched his fists and Fringy saturated his underpants.
"I'd like to consider myself a fair man,"
Arachnia said while flashing a devilish grin.
"So I'm going to give you a split-second head start."
With unnatural deftness, Count Arachnia shot through the air, cackling as he descended upon the moviegoers. Many almost instantly scrambled for the aisles, trampling those who had tripped. Others were utterly frozen, Fringy among them, his eyes wide and pupils microscopic. He clutched his armrest so tightly that stuffing burst through the tearing fabric. Felix watched as Count Arachnia glided overhead and toward the group of young women sitting a few rows behind him. They shrieked as Count Arachnia raised his forearms before him and projected a thick mass of silk from his wrists. The silk wrapped around the women and pinned them to the ground. Count Arachnia lunged at the defenseless women, laughing maniacally as he flared his enormous and slick fangs, which looked remarkably like those belonging to a funnel web spider. Without thinking, Felix tossed Fringy's ice cream cone at Count Arachnia, who effortlessly punted it out of the way. For a few tense seconds, Count Arachnia glared at Felix with his bloodshot eyes. In those eyes, Felix saw no man, only a vicious monster fueled solely by impulse and bound by not one qualm. Arachnia grinned at Felix before turning around and plunging his fangs into one of the women's necks. Her friends, pinned down next to her, cried as Count Arachnia drained her of all her blood. By the time he pried his fangs from her neck, the woman was nothing more than a grey, hollow husk. He proceeded to wrap the woman up in a silky cocoon before turning to her friends. "Fringy!" Felix spat as he grabbed the plague doctor's arm and tried to pull him out of his seat. Realizing that there was no time to waste, Felix kicked Fringy in the face, finally snapping him from his paralyzed state. "We need to run now!" Fringy glanced over his shoulder at Count Arachnia and let out a petrified shriek as he leapt from his chair, showering the nearby seats in popcorn. "Felix, run!" Fringy shrieked while sprinting to the aisle and down the stairs. "That's what it... fuck it, whatever," Felix sighed as he ran after Fringy. The pair scrambled down the stairs and towards the exit, spilling into the foyer with the other patrons who had managed to escape. Screams continued to bellow through the cinema doors as Count Arachnia laid waste to those who remained inside. Disinterested in the prospects of sticking around to see if Count Arachnia would tire of the carnage, Fringy and Felix bolted for the nearest exit. "Well, in hindsight, I probably should have gone for a jog at least once this year," Fringy panted as he tried to keep up with Felix. "Let's get to the car, Felix, quickly!" "Oh, thanks for the input, Fringy. I was thinking of getting into the car slowly until you said that," Felix leered as he maneuvered through a group of shoppers running in the opposite direction. He glanced over his shoulder at them as a concerning thought emerged. "Why, is there something we don't know about?" "What do you mean?" Fringy inquired through wheezy breaths. "Why are those people running towards the cinema?" Felix vigorously shook his head before squinting at Fringy. "Why are they running at all? Do they know what happened in there?" Felix looked around and saw dozens of frantic shoppers running in several directions, further compounding his confusion. He then stared straight ahead, and his heart skipped a beat. "Ah, crap!" Felix spat as he skidded to a halt. "Fringy, look!" "Huh?" Fringy groaned before finally noticing what Felix had spotted. In a panic, he lost his footing and fell to the slick floor, upon which he slid for several seconds before stopping just in front of the sliding doors leading outside. The doors were drenched in a seemingly impenetrable mass of spiders. Short of breath and terrified of the sight, Fringy scrambled away from the doors while Felix carefully approached them, stopping just shy of the mat. "What in the..." Felix muttered as he stared at the mass of spiders forming a wall between him and the outside world. "This has to be that Count Arachnia guy's doing." "We're trapped, aren't we?" Fringy said, his voice cracking. "We're fucking trapped in here! We're dead!" A spine-chilling cackle echoed through the halls of the shopping center, drawing the pair's gaze. Count Arachnia strutted out of the cinema, drenched in blood and webbing. He immediately launched into the nearest group of shoppers, tearing them to shreds so quickly that they didn't even have a chance to scream. "Not yet," Felix said, grabbing Fringy by the hood and dragging him into the nearby department store. Agonized howls continued to bombard Felix's ears, along with sounds he didn't dare put images to, yet the shopping center was growing unmistakably quieter. The cacophony accompanying the chaos was dying in favor of the hum of the center's air conditioning unit. It wasn't difficult for Felix to ascertain why. "Well, this is just dandy, isn't it?" Fringy yelped while scratching at himself for seemingly no reason. He sat huddled in the corner of the department store amidst clothing racks brimming with dresses. "The one time I go outside!" "Oh, your positivity is infectious," Felix said while peering through the rack resting between him and one of the store's main aisles. "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in such a dour mood, Felix. My bad. From now on, I'll try harder to be less upset about my impending death." "We're still alive, Fringy. But for how much longer?" "I guess that depends on how useful you want to make yourself." Felix leered before stepping away from the clothes rack and staring at the floor as he paced back and forth. "How do you think one would go about killing a spider vampire?" "Spider vampire?" Fringy tilted his head to the side and cocked one eyebrow. "Well, the guy calls himself Count Arachnia," Felix shrugged, "and he shoots webs and sucks blood. Seems like a logical conclusion to draw. Well, logical given the circumstances." "What, you sure he's not just a fucked up version of Am I allowed to reference existing works?" Fringy stared at Felix with an expecting, wide-eyed expression. Felix's mouth hung agape for a few seconds as he contemplated potential responses to the plague doctor's inane question. "What does that mean, Fringy?" Felix inquired whilst clutching at the air. "It's just, you know how some movies feature knockoff versions of these existing products while other movies make direct reference? Why is that? Do they pay for that?" "I don't know, and I don't care," Felix said whilst rubbing both sides of his temple. "Instead of focusing on whether we're trapped in here with an original creation or a knockoff spider—" "Careful!" Fringy interrupted, placing his index finger against Felix's mouth. "Instead of discussing the intricacies of copyright law," Felix murmured as he slowly nudged Fringy's hand away from his face, "how about we focus on the matter at hand? To that end, do you have any suggestions as to how we should proceed? Thoughts you'd like to share with the group?" "We could stay here," Fringy responded with a hurried nod. "We could wait them out." "That seems like a bad idea," Felix mumbled, gazing to the ceiling as he traced his tongue along his lower lip. "I don't know how spider vampires work, but I can only imagine they have similar abilities to regular vampires. Like heightened senses? Among other things, yeah," Felix replied. He wedged his hands through the rack before him and parted the clothes, granting him a view of the main aisle of the department store. "If Count Arachnia locked us in here by mind-controlling a bunch of spiders to barricade the exits, it's safe to assume that we're not leaving this shopping center until either we're dead or he is. Which means we have to slay Count Arachnia," Fringy slowly muttered as his eyes widened. "But how do you fend off a spider vampire?" Felix questioned. "Do spiders hate garlic? Do you stomp on a spider vampire to kill it?" "Well, I'd take size 13 shoes," Fringy said as he removed one of his loafers and held it in the air. "You think this is big enough to do the job?" "No, Fringy," Felix groaned while rubbing his eyes. "I don't fucking think it is." The sound of high heels striking a hard surface suddenly echoed through the store. Felix clamped his mouth shut and scanned his surroundings. The tapping continued at a disconcertingly steady pace. Felix continued to look for people through the clothing rack. There was nobody around as far as he could tell, yet the repetitive noise grew louder until it ceased. A stark silence fell over the department store, and it didn't put Felix at ease. "Fringy, can you see anything?" Felix whispered as his eyes darted left and right. "Yeah," Fringy gulped. With a trembling hand, he pointed to the ceiling. Felix slowly traced his eyes upward, and jumped when they met those of 3 women standing on the ceiling. The 3 women, who looked startlingly like those Fringy had wanted to speak to before the movie, took a few steps forward, their high heels clinging to the grey roof as though it were lined with glue. Their dangling long hair was the only thing which betrayed their orientation as the trio looked right at home, standing upside down. "What's on the menu, Alex?" The blonde woman grinned, scanning Felix and the petrified plague doctor. "Looks like koala and cuck shanks." Alex chuckled as she tapped her long fingernails together. "Oh, what?" Fringy groaned, his shoulders slumped like those of an elderly pug. "You're dead," Felix stated, pointing at the group of women. "I saw Count Arachnia kill you." "I don't feel very dead," the redhead said as she twirled in place. "What about you, Isla?" "The feeling's mutual, Fran," Isla chuckled before running her fingers through her blonde hair and tossing it. "Then again, I wouldn't know. Maybe they can tell us about it." Isla lunged at Fringy, who let out a shriek as he crawled away on all fours. Felix took a floral dress from the nearby rack and threw it at the diving Fran, who tumbled into the wall as the fabric wrapped around her neck. Fringy and Felix sprinted out of the women's section and into the electronics department, the former glancing over his shoulder to see the group regaining their bearings and giving chase. They didn't move quite as swiftly as Count Arachnia, but given Felix was a short plush koala and Fringy was fat, their slightly inferior traits seemed unlikely to significantly increase the pair's chances of survival. "Guess that means spider vampires can turn people too," Fringy panted as he clutched at his chest. "Does that mean all the other rules apply?" "Well, I doubt they sell steaks here, Fringy," Felix responded, "so we're gonna have to improvise." "Improvise? Like throw shit at them." Felix stopped by a shelf containing an array of DVDs. He picked up a handful of boxes, deliberately choosing the films he didn't like, and began lobbing them at the pursuing spider vampires.
Stop it!
Alex spat while batting the boxes away.
That won't work, you have to throw something bigger.
Fringy exclaimed. He looked around for a few seconds before settling on a nearby display television. He picked up the TV and heaved as he struggled to maintain his grip.
Stand back, Felix!
Fringy spun around awkwardly and flung the TV at the spider vampires, though that might be a misnomer given that it simply fell out of his hands and shattered on the floor. The embarrassed plague doctor's eyes darted between a thoroughly unimpressed Felix and the group of snide spider vampires. Alex raised her hands and pointed them at Fringy. Within the blink of an eye, he was staring down a huge mass of silk shooting towards him. The webbing struck Fringy and pinned him to the nearby wall.
Holy crap!
Fringy screeched while struggling to free himself.
Felix, you gotta get me out of this thing!
Felix sprinted to the shattered TV and swiped a piece of broken glass from the floor. The moment he had it in his hands, Felix was whisked into the air, dangling upside down. Felix watched as Fran, glued to the ceiling and frothing at the mouth, reeled him in like a fish on a line. Without a moment's hesitation, Felix sliced the webbing attached to his foot.
Fringy?
Felix shouted as he tumbled to the ground.
Catch!
Felix tossed the broken piece of glass to Fringy, who adorned an expression best described as one of pure panic, given that Felix had just thrown a very sharp object at his face. Fringy wrestled his right arm from the webbing and caught the shard of glass as it came within just a few inches of his face. He looked to the left and saw Alex and Isla sprinting towards him with horrifying smiles. Felix smashed into a shelf containing several bottles of perfume. He hit the ground with a thud, groaning as he pried himself from the tiling while being drenched in an assortment of overpriced aromas. Before he could fully get up, Fran landed just a few meters away from him, shattering the tiling beneath her feet. Grinning from ear to ear, she took a few steps forward, but for seemingly no reason, she stopped and her smirk faded. Fran took one step backward and brought her hands to her face, clamping her thin, pale fingers around her nose and mouth. Felix examined her with one eyebrow raised. It was only then that he noticed he was saturated in perfume. An idea swiftly coalesced in Felix's furry head. The plush koala leapt to his feet, grabbed the nearest unbroken bottle of perfume, held it before him as though it were a pistol, and charged toward Fran.
Back off!
Fran cried as she broke into a sprint.
Nah,
Felix snickered. He sprayed the perfume at Fran, who hissed as she collapsed to the ground. Her hissing soon turned to screaming as flesh began to peel off her bones. Felix refused to relent, squeezing the bottle even as he was forced to clamp his eyes shut to shield them from the smoke emanating from the disintegrating spider vampire. When the howls subsided and the intense heat died down, Felix opened his eyes. All that was left of Fran was her scorched skeleton, huddled amongst the t-shirt racks. Felix took a few steps back and let out a sigh of relief, though said relief evaporated when he heard a shriek belonging to someone he knew all too well.
Felix!
Fringy cried out from across the store.
A little help!
Felix bolted into the main aisle and snatched an unbroken bottle of cologne from the floor. When he made it back into the electronics department, he found Fringy, free of the webbing, but firmly in the grip of Alex and Isla. The two women had their fangs flared and were ready to bring them down upon the petrified plague doctor. Felix tossed the cologne bottle at Isla. It shattered on her arm, which promptly erupted into a mass of smoke and melting flesh as residual fluid struck Alex's hair and set it ablaze.
Holy shit!
Fringy exclaimed while crawling away from the burning spider vampires.
Come on, let's go!
Felix shouted, waving Fringy toward the exit. The Green Plague Doctor and his plush teal koala friend found themselves running through a shopping center devoid of shoppers. Lifeless bodies were littered across the blood-soaked floor. Intermittent screams pierced through the quiet hum of the air conditioner. They came less frequently than before. There weren't many people left standing. Noticing how loud his footsteps were, Felix directed Fringy to the nearest shop, a fruit and vegetable store sitting opposite the supermarket. Felix deftly mounted one of the stands and landed on his backside, at which point he finally loosened up and let out a heavy breath. Fringy lumbered into the store far less elegantly, collapsing to the ground as his fat-encumbered lungs gasped for air.
It's times like this when I'm glad I don't use deodorant.
Fringy panted as he crawled behind a rack filled with watermelons. What? Felix asked in genuine bewilderment.
I mean, you can never know if the bottle you get is the defect filled with sulfuric acid, so, better safe than sorry, right?
You probably shouldn't have told me that, Felix smirked.
I'm very confused.
Fringy scratched the back of his head.
You telling me that wasn't sulfuric acid you threw at those things?
Just regular old perfume, Felix replied before resting against the fruit stand. Spiders don't like strong aromas.
Well, I don't like broccoli, but that doesn't mean I'll turn into a steaming pile of goo if I eat it.
Fringy sputtered.
You telling me that the fatal weakness of these spider vampires is crappy off-brand aftershave?
I doubt it's the only one either. Felix waggled his index finger in the air as he gazed upward, locked in thought. Vampires don't like garlic, crucifixes, daylight, steaks. They have plenty of strengths, but they also have more than one weakness. That's gotta be the case for these things too.
So, the shoe idea wasn't that stupid after all,
Fringy said with a gleeful smile. No, that was still terrible, Felix stated flatly.
Stand up!
The distinctive voice of Count Arachnia suddenly called out from beyond the fruit and vegetable store.
I know you're in there. Don't worry, I'm not going to kill you yet.
Oh, that's reassuring, Felix muttered after a momentary silence.
How do we know you're not going to kill us?
Fringy asked, provoking a pained wince from Felix. He threw a cold glare at Fringy, who hadn't yet realized the error of his ways.
Idiot,
Felix hissed through gritted teeth.
What?
Fringy shrugged. It only took a few more seconds for the plague doctor's brain to catch up with his mouth.
Ah, crap!
Felix got to his feet and peeked above the stand, glaring at Count Arachnia through the gaps in the produce. The head spider vampire stood directly before the store, his forearms tucked behind his almost perfectly straight back, and his cape sprawled across the tiled floor.
You two are quite an elusive pair,
Arachnia said while shaking his head.
Yeah,
Felix replied, his eyes firmly locked on the spider vampire.
That ice cream stunt back in the cinema didn't do much to dazzle me, but killing one of my new acolytes, I have to admit, that's quite impressive. You ask me, that's deserving of a consolation prize,
Fringy exclaimed, feigning confidence as he hid his trembling hands in his coat pockets.
Allowing us to leave unscathed, for example? Oh no, I'm still going to kill you two,
Arachnia stated.
I just wanted you to know that you've gained a sliver of my respect. I hope that provides you a bit of comfort during your incredibly painful demise.
Without thinking, Felix grabbed an orange from the adjacent shelf and lobbed it at Count Arachnia, whose upbeat demeanor immediately shifted into that of concern. Catching himself, Arachnia sunk back into a calm state and allowed the orange to hit him in the face. But it was too late. For the second time that night, the spider vampires had unknowingly tipped their hand.
Holy shit!
Felix clicked his fingers before turning to face Fringy.
Citrus fruit! Spiders hate citrus fruit!
Almost immediately after those words escaped Felix's mouth, Fringy picked up a set of limes and threw them at Count Arachnia.
Take that, you dick!
Fringy shouted triumphantly as the volley of limes bombarded Count Arachnia, and simply dropped to the floor without dealing any damage to him. Fringy's shoulders slumped, and his eyelids hung low.
Felix, I am very disappointed.
Maybe try peeling them first, Fringy, Felix replied whilst midway through skinning an orange. Identifying his perilous position, Count Arachnia hissed at Felix before leaping into the air and flying towards the store. Felix was only halfway through skinning the orange, but with Arachnia bearing down on him rapidly, he had no choice but to make use of it as swiftly as possible. Arachnia managed to bat the soaring orange out of the way, but a little bit of citric acid made it onto his arm. Felix dived to the right as Count Arachnia crashed into the watermelon stand, desperately attempting to put out the fire which had erupted on his forearm. He reached for one of the broken watermelons and pressed it against his arm to cauterize the wound. When Fringy and Felix turned around, they were greeted with an unwelcome sight. Dozens of recently converted spider vampires were sprinting towards them, hissing, shouting, and shooting webs out of their wrists. They didn't have enough fruit to take them all on, And it wouldn't be long before Count Arachnia was back on his feet, with nowhere else to go. Fringy and Felix ran into the supermarket, with the spider vampires hot on their non-existent tails. The pair stumbled into the dairy aisle, with Fringy tripping over the corpse of a clerk locked in a petrified pose. Fringy spun back around and watched in terror as a group of middle-aged men crowded into the aisle, swiping at the air like rabid animals. Felix swiped a carton of milk from the fridge and tossed it at the spider vampires. Milk erupted from the cartons as they struck the faces of the recent converts. They cursed as they lost their footing and tumbled to the floor. Fringy got back up and bolted to the end of the aisle while Felix climbed the shelving and scanned the environment, counting 24 spider vampires running the gambit from sturdy tradies to decrepit grandmothers whose stature betrayed their newfound agility. "Can you see anything?" Fringy inquired before slamming into the meat produce located on the wall adjacent to the dairy aisle. "I can see a lot of things, Fringy. Be more specific." "Okay," Fringy hissed in an offended tone. "Can you see anything we could use to stop these spider vampires?" Felix looked at the signs hanging above the aisle, searching for any goods which could help the pair fend off their pursuers. "Stationery, aisle 7, Felix pointed. "Stab them with pencils?" Fringy shrieked. "Would you prefer to try stabbing them with your fingers?" Felix replied midway through jumping to the next shelf. Fringy was first to aisle 7, with Felix keeping an eye out from his elevated position. Fringy shuffled down the aisle, muttering to himself as he contemplated which pencils and pens would serve as the best weapons. Sweat pooled on his forehead as the howls of incredibly frustrated and hungry spider vampires grew louder. With a weak shriek, Fringy grabbed the nearest set of pens. He attempted to open the bag, but the seal wouldn't break. Fringy then yanked the bag so hard and swiftly that it tore clean in half, spilling pens all over the floor. "Damn it!" Fringy spat. He knelt and picked up the scattered pens as quickly as he could. Before he'd managed to gather them all, 2 burly spider vampires strode into the aisle and charged toward him. Fringy let out an exacerbated huff as he tossed the handful of pens he'd managed to scrounge up at the attackers. One of the pens punched through the eye of the spider vampire on the left, who then tripped over and fell face first into the ground, wedging the pen into his brain. The man's companion tripped over his lifeless corpse and slid across the ground, coming to a stop within a few inches of Fringy. He grabbed the plague doctor's leg and flashed his fangs, prompting Fringy to repeatedly kick him in the face. Felix, who had only just reached aisle 7, snatched a wooden broom hanging in the adjacent aisle, snapped it in half against his knee, and jumped down. He plunged the jagged broom directly into the spider vampire's spine. The monster screeched as he turned to ash. Fringy looked at Felix, who returned the gaze with a cheeky smile. He tossed Fringy the other broken piece before gripping his own with both hands. "You ready for a fight?" Felix inquired. "No." Fringy shook his head, nervously clutching the broom to his chest. "Great." Felix sighed before glancing over his shoulder at 2 young men running straight for the pair. "Alright, get up, we'll charge at them like spearmen. On 3. "On 3 or after 3? Fringy asked after standing up. "What the... I explicitly said on 3, Fringy. I'm just making sure." "Well, now we're out of time," Felix spat. "On 1. "On 1 or 1? Felix yelled. Barreling forward, the mismatched pair let out a war cry, as did the spider vampires, who raised their arms into the air and extended their saliva-laden fangs. Fringy's heart raced as he drew closer to the monsters, and the details on their face became more apparent. Their bloodshot eyes, the sheen of their fangs, their pale features. For the briefest of moments, Fringy considered turning around and running away, but in the corner of his eye, he could see Felix maintaining the charge, not wavering for even a second. And for the first time in a long time, Fringy chose not to relent. He would not flee this fight. Fringy and Felix impaled the spider vampires directly in their hearts. Fringy shouted jubilantly as the monsters disintegrated before their eyes.
Did you see that, Felix? Fringy hollered. That I did, Felix smirked. Come on, let's keep going. No words in the pair's vocabulary could describe the bellow which filled the supermarket. It was soon accompanied by a cacophony of collapsing shelves and shattering produce. In mere seconds, the noise became so intense that it hurt Fringy and Felix's ears, and through the aisle burst forth an 8-foot funnel-web spider with piercing maroon eyes and copious saliva dripping from its fangs. Oh my god! Fringy exclaimed. It's Shelob! Wait, hold on. Is that public domain yet? What? I'm not Shelob, the spider said in an offended tone. I'm Count Arachnia. Ah, great. We're safe, Fringy sighed as he wiped the sweat from his brow. What in the hell are you talking about? Arachnia spat, albeit a spidery version of spitting. Felix plunged his broom into one of Count Arachnia's legs. Blood shot into the air as Arachnia lurched around, crashing into the shelves while cursing to the heavens. Distraction! Fringy clapped his hands together. Definitely my idea. Alright, time to make like an arranged couple, Fringy, Felix shouted as he sprinted past him. Actually, only 4% of arranged marriages end in separation, Fringy replied with a smug grin, or what constituted a smug grin when one was wearing a mask. Why are you... Run? Oh shit, yeah! Fringy exclaimed as Count Arachnia ripped the broken piece of wood from his leg and let out a blood-curdling howl. Felix led the way to the farthest aisle, which was filled to the brim with detergents and sprays. Unfortunately for him, at the end of it stood a horde of frothing spider vampires. He turned around and saw Fringy staring down another group approaching from the other side. Both ends of the aisle were blocked off. The Green Plague Doctor and his plush teal koala friend were trapped. Congratulations! Arachnia exclaimed as he leapt over the other aisles and slammed into the floor so hard that the earth trembled. He became subsumed in smoke for a few seconds before emerging as his humanoid self and levitating into the air. You've achieved what I previously thought was impossible! You have legitimately pissed me off! Thanks for the compliment, Felix said, as he carefully approached the shelf nearest to him. Look, buddy, have you ever considered adopting a new diet? Fringy pleaded. I hear keto is all the craze these days. You should give it a try. This is the end, Teal. Arachnia shrugged as he drifted towards the pair. The sooner you accept that... I don't know what I was going with that thought. It doesn't really matter whether you accept it or not. You're dead. But who to kill first? Decisions. Count Arachnia's eyes darted between Fringy and Felix for a few painfully quiet moments before they settled on the plush teal koala. You are an asshole, you know that? Arachnia said, scowling at Felix. The koala met his glare with steely determination. Bring it, you arachnid fuck. Felix's confidence seemed misplaced in the face of Count Arachnia, who snatched him off the ground before Fringy could even blink. Felix! Fringy screamed as he was pinned to the ground by Isla, Alex, and a handful of other spider vampires who had snuck up on him from behind. Remember me? Isla inquired as she waved at Fringy with her regrown hand. Sit tight, it'll be your turn soon. Felix repeatedly punched Count Arachnia in the head, but the blows achieved nothing. It was as though he were punching a brick wall. The spider vampire wrapped his fingers around Felix's ear, twisted his head to the side, and plunged his fangs into the koala's neck. No! Fringy cried as he reached out for his friend. Count Arachnia's enormous grin faded. He sheepishly glanced around at his perplexed acolytes before looking at Felix's neck with one eyebrow perched. What the? Count Arachnia said after drawing his fangs from Felix's neck and plucking cotton from his teeth. Felix opened his eyes and smirked at the befuddled spider vampire. I'm a toy, you idiot, Felix said. He pointed a concealed bottle of insect spray he'd pulled from the shelf at Count Arachnia's face and squeezed the trigger. Count Arachnia burst into flames as he was saturated with insect spray. The pair fell to the floor, but Felix landed on his feet and continued to spray the writhing and screaming Count.
The spider vampires, pinning Fringy to the ground, stood up and shrieked as they too spontaneously combusted. The supermarket became awash in bright orange light until all that remained of Count Arachnia and his converts was a sea of ash. Felix stood up and examined the carnage before letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding in. He turned to face Fringy, who had his head tucked beneath his hands and his eyes clamped shut. After several protracted seconds of silence, he pried them open and looked around at the mounds of ash surrounding him. Did we win? Fringy asked after looking to Felix expectantly. Yeah, I think we did, Felix said with a smile. And so, Fringy and Felix returned to the sliding doors and found them free of spiders. They stepped outside and met with a full moon and starry sky. They had won. Really, Felix had won, but Fringy was also there, and that was probably worth something. The pair walked home and went to sleep in their cozy beds, but not before silently contemplating that which they had learned over that tumultuous night. Between man and all else lay a tenuous agreement to which he is the sole observer, and there is nothing he can do to change that. Though man is powerful within his domain, all else beyond his domain rests beyond his control and cares little for his opinions. To the fearful and discontent man, this is an intolerable arrangement. In all else man finds foes, he is surrounded by a cabal conspiring to abet his death, and so man chooses to stand alone, and in doing so, hastens his own demise. Yet man may, at any time, recognize that his opinions are worthless in the face of all else, of which he is a part, and though this man, the wise, humble, and fearless man, may not conquer all else, he will be content amongst all else, for he has conquered himself. Fringy! Felix screamed in the plague doctor's ear, pulling him from his slumber. Felix! Fringy said, breathing a long sigh of relief. Oh, am I glad to see you! What the hell are you doing? Felix inquired with a stern look on his face. I had the most horrible dream, Fringy explained as he rested his right hand on his forehead. We went to the movies and this weird spider-vampire hybrid called Count Arachnia tried to kill us, but through sheer grit and determination, we triumphed over him. That was your horrible dream? Felix asked. I mean, I thought it was pretty unpleasant. Oh, unlike reality? What are you talking about? You know, Felix mumbled as he grabbed the chain wrapped around his neck and dangled it in the air. Fringy sat up straight atop the dirt and gazed around at hundreds of malnourished humans carrying enormous clay blocks on their backs. Standing above them were an army of emus bedecked in futuristic body armor and wielding an assortment of plasma weapons. Cast against the maroon sky was a half-completed megastructure sitting amidst a sea of charred rubble and corpses. Right, Fringy murmured, his expression sinking. The Second Great Emu War. Hey! A gruff emu barked as he lashed Fringy with his whip. Get back to work! Oh hey, thanks for checking out my little Halloween special, I really appreciate it. Now, I'm sure there are a handful of you thinking to yourselves, what the hell was that? In an only mildly derisive way, I hope. You know, wondering to yourselves like, Felix, who is that? Green Teal? What? And to that I say, what, you don't know about Green Teal, that project I've never spoken about or promoted once on this platform? I'm so fucking stupid. I've been working on a comic called Green Teal for the last few months. It's a comedic comic book starring yours truly and a plush teal koala called Felix. It's a lot of fun. You should check out the 20 plus pages I've already made for it. I've been posting one new page every week on my website, dubioussanity.com, as well as on Patreon and my social media pages. I've also been posting short stories and humorous pieces on my website every 2 weeks. Sorry for not letting you know about that, but hey, if you enjoyed this short story, maybe you'll enjoy those too. dubioussanity.com. Get on over there. Thanks again for sticking around. Have a great Halloween, All Saints Day, Day of the Dead. Give me money on Patreon. See ya!